So, good evening, you Greek goats. Welcome back to another Geoguessr video. Today, I'm going to be taking you on my second part to the Poles of the World series. In the first part, we went through Europe here on this world map I made that basically takes you through the different pole types around the world. And in today's video, we're going through all the rest of the continents because Europe is so dense and has so many countries covered. The rest of the world feels like a bit of a breeze. It's going to be really good for you guys to know this kind of thing. Actually, roadside poles, especially on no-moving Geoguessr games, are essentially the most useful hint, at least in my opinion, along with road lines. And so when it comes to learning these, particularly in some countries, for example, my own country of Australia, there are very, very useful regional hints, which will get you a lot more points. And yeah, this video is definitely aimed at people who are a bit less experienced, but everyone who's experienced will also learn a lot from this one. I'm confident of it. Mark my word. And I discovered a lot of stuff while I was making this one. And so, guys, let's jump in. I thought I was recording this in one part, so we're going to jump in halfway through. And of course, there'll be part one linked in the description. And yeah, I hope you guys really enjoy it. Also, linked in the description will be this, which is my notable polls document, which is basically what this video is working off of. I spent a long time hyperlinking and just linking you guys to all these different polls. So definitely give this a check out once you've finished the video. And yeah, guys, I hope you guys really enjoy it. Let's get into it. Okay, moving on to the beautiful continent of North America. And we here have a wooden pole. This is the generic style. This is in Canada in particular, right here. But USA and Canada both use very similar looking generic wooden poles like this, often with these 3 points on top. And here we have the standard like single pole version as well. And then we have this little hook on top, which is much more common to see in North America than in Europe. So if you see that little hook on top, maybe an indication that you're in North America. You can see it elsewhere, of course. But yeah, you often see that over there, especially on single poles like this. Okay, next one, we have a bit of an interesting one. This one's from Canada Pole Expert. He came through with the source. This one is a transformer. We've got a transformer here. And a transformer in New Brunswick and in British Columbia is much more likely, or basically always, faces towards the road, which is very interesting indeed. Whereas in other provinces, for example, Ontario here, we have it facing parallel with the road, or facing the driver, as I like to imagine it. So that's definitely quite useful, and it's fairly consistent from what I looked at as well. Also, here we have a yellow kind of a supporter, kind of like sleeve on this cord running from the pole here, and that one is very North American to do. US and Canada, you'll often see this yellow thing running towards the ground there, and yeah, it's a good way to distinguish it from Europe as well. Okay, next one, we have the US generic pole here. Basically no difference from the Canadian one as far as I could tell. And here's the hook one again. And here we have some state-specific poles. Pay attention here. This is very good. If you see these 3 yellow bands here, then you're going to be in California, and it's very common as well. So if you see a pole without these ones, maybe you could even start considering that it might not be California. But I'd say about half of Californian poles have these 3 yellows on them. Not to mention Hawaii, which also has a yellow band around its poles as well, or at least a big yellow sticker. And so those 2 are very, very useful indeed. Okay, moving on. Now we're in Mexico, and the standard Mexican pole is octagonal, and it's made of concrete. And you can see these all over Mexico, and they're very, very distinctive, and they often have a little bit of writing engraved on here. Now, I think you can occasionally see these in Ecuador and Colombia, but yeah, generally speaking, these ones are mostly found in Mexico, that's for sure. And I just wanted to highlight the fact that on top of Mexican poles, they often have a very distinctive look in terms of like kind of bigger bulbs and like a thin metal sheet often. That's the way I'd say it. I don't know, this is kind of more just like the feeling of them, but I think they are distinguishable from other countries. So in your own time, it might be worth looking at the kind of difference between Mexican pole tops and other ones in the Americas. And here's another one, another example of that. Often they'll be like bent over on a 90-degree angle, in my opinion. And yeah, this is just an example of a wooden pole as well in Mexico, which there are a good number of. Here's another wooden pole as well, and here's like a trident, particularly. I would say this one might be a Mexican one, but definitely one you can see in Mexico, that's for sure. And you can see again bigger bulbs. Kind of just my own thought here, but yeah, that's what I've noticed in Mexico. And now we are moving on to Guatemala. Guatemala will often just use these standard kind of round concrete poles, so a good way to distinguish it from Mexico, where these types of poles would be quite uncommon. And then also we have just a bunch of wooden poles here. Yeah, wooden poles are fairly common in Guatemala, more than you may expect. Okay, and here we are in in Dominican Republic. And Dominican Republic, you have the easy car meta here, but say you can't see it, say you're playing Community World. Well, there's really nice metas with the poles. So they are actually squared off poles, so similar to Thai poles or Russian poles maybe, but they're almost always painted at the bottom. And in the city of Santiago de los Caballeros, it's almost always painted gray, whereas over here in Santo Domingo, they're almost always painted like, okay, that's actually still Santiago, but over in Santo Domingo, they're almost always painted a different color, not gray. And so let's see what I mean by that. So in Dominican Republic, you basically only have two cities with significant Google coverage, Santiago and Santo Domingo. And so Santo Domingo, you have colorful painted or different colors like white or yellow or something like that. And over here, you normally have gray. And so that's a good way to distinguish them. Not 100% effective, but very effective indeed. And so that concludes North America. Let's move on to South. Okay, Colombia time here. Colombia is another one of these countries that uses majority of these rounded concrete poles. That's the thing I wrote easily the most in this document, always concrete rounded poles. They seem to be very common all around the world, and so that's the standard one for Colombia here. And here we have another Colombian pole. I believe this one's actually wooden, so you do see wood every now and again. And here we have some more unique Colombian poles here, which have black and yellow painted stripes on them, and you will see this quite commonly in Colombia and elsewhere in South America as well. Every now and again, for example, Peru has it, but this is most common in Colombia, especially if you see a green climate with this, you can probably send there on a difficult round. Okay, so also in Ecuador now, we have these kind of section poles similar to the ones you'd see in Spain or in France, and these ones are quite common in Ecuador. So be sure to make sure you know the difference between these and Brazilian poles, which we're going to address in a sec. And the best way to distinguish them is that on Ecuadorian poles, the margins or like the kind of sections are much smaller, whereas Brazilian poles have larger sections. So we'll see that in a minute. But that is an Ecuadorian pole and a fairly common one as well. Then also in Ecuador, you just have the standard pole that we've been talking about the whole video. And then also, we're already on Peru. Okay, so that's the only two I really brought up for Ecuador. But yeah, generally speaking, that's probably a good selection. And here we are in Peru, where you have this kind of concrete pole that's kind of the standard looking one. But often, if you see these three kind of juts going in the same direction, then you will be in Peru. This is a Peru exclusive pole, very useful indeed. And here we have a Peru wooden pole, which you can see every now and again. They use a decent amount of wooden poles in Peru, I'd say. And here is a similar one to the Colombian one, where they've also painted the bottom. Here's something I'd say about Peruvian poles. Take it or leave it. This is kind of my own conjecture again. But they often have like some painted stickers or painted, little sections on the pole. Not talking about this section here, but just like something like that. So black or yellow or white, they often have it on Peruvian poles. More common than other countries around it, I would say. Not entirely sure how accurate that is, but yes, it's my opinion. Okay, moving on to Chile. Chile uses these concrete poles, which are not round, but like kind of squared off. And they look similar to the Brazilian ones, but on Chilean ones, they are hollow in the bottom section. And so in Peru, in Brazil, as we'll see, there'll be sections running down it, whereas in Chile, it's just hollow all down the bottom here. So you can see that maybe this one's a better example. It's hollow all the way down. And so, yeah, these ones, you often see similar poles in New Zealand, actually, which we'll see later on. Even there's some similar ones in Philippines. But as for South America, this one's actually quite distinctive, especially if you're nearby and you can see that there are no sections running through it. And so moving on here is a pole, and I believe we're actually in Argentina now, and this pole top is quite Argentinian, I would say, and also down the bottom we're just using a standard round concrete pole. And here we are with another example of that. This almost looks similar to the Peruvian pole, but on Argentinian versions, the three hangs will never be all in the same direction. So here's another example here where it's alternating, but yeah, they will never be all in the same direction like on a Peruvian one. And here is a wooden pole as well. Argentina actually does use quite a few wooden poles, a significant minority, one could say, and they look very similar to the American ones. So when you're staring at a view like this, and say we couldn't see these road lines here, you have to be careful that you don't guess US or Canada, because they look quite similar a lot of the time. Okay, and here's another example, but this one is not in Argentina, pardon me, this one is in Uruguay. And in Uruguay, you'll often have these wooden or concrete poles, but they'll often have this trident on top, where you have the two bulbs at the bottom and then one at the top, kind of a hook top like you see in North America often. And yeah, this trident is very distinguishable from a distance. Even if just looking at this, I could tell that this is Uruguay, not Argentina. They do have like sometimes, occasionally, somewhat similar looking ones in Argentina, but this particular one, if you can remember it, is Uruguay only, and very a good exclusive pole to know. And then sometimes you'll just have a standard one hook in Uruguay, and you'll have this wooden pole as well quite often. Okay, and then sometimes they'll just use the standard concrete standalone pole as well for Uruguay. Okay, and final one here is another Uruguayan one, which is squared off instead. I would say this one's a little bit rarer than the other ones we viewed so far. Okay, and finally we have Brazil, the probably the most infamous of the whole continent, and that's because it's quite an easy pole to recognize. So we have these, it's a concrete, it's sectioned, it generally has 3 sections. I would say 3 is easily the most common way to have it, and that has dots all the way to the top. And yeah, concrete sectioned, kind of like this. This is the kind of profile. It's kind of thinner on one side, whereas thicker on the section side, and it's very, very recognizable indeed. And you shouldn't really confuse it with too many other countries, because even though there are similar ones, this is the Brazilian one. And here we have as well a Brazilian one which is round. So you do see these ones maybe in rural areas, perhaps more so often, or in rural areas, I would say, or in rural towns. And this one is painted white at the bottom as well. Not really sure. Don't trust me too much when I say like rural / urban distinctions. That's just my own observations, but this one definitely you can see often in Brazil as well. Okay, moving on to East Asia here. We're in Indonesia. We have a standard kind of round concrete pole. Indonesian poles actually do have distinctive tops, and Kodiak is working on a guide to these pole tops, so you'll see that eventually come out, and he's given me a few pointers here today, but basically, if we're talking about the whole of Indonesia, they often have like a very thin metal bar at the top of the pole, and definitely using concrete poles most often over there. But here is one hint I can disclose to you from Kodiak's upcoming guide, and that is that on the lesser island, the lesser Nusa Island, so I'll show you where they are in a second. You'll see this long supporting frame, which you often have in Indonesia. But for example, on the first location here, it was a short one. But when you see a longer one, when it's about double the length of that one there, when you see this longer one, you're going to be in the Lesser Nusa Islands, which are just over here. The Lesser Sunda Islands, sorry. That was East Nusa Tenggara, but yeah, the Lesser Sunda Islands. That is where you're going to be. And so, good to keep in mind that longer supporting bar can help you get a lot of points. And so if you see it, you shouldn't guess in the other spots, because even though it's not gospel, it is quite a good hint that way. Okay, and here we are again in Indonesia. We have more of these like thin metal tops, but this one's also a metal pole, which you see all throughout Southeast Asia. All these countries that I'm going to say mostly have concrete poles, also all the time have metal poles as well. Okay, moving on to Malaysia here. Malaysia is a great country because on the mainland of Malaysia, on the peninsula, you get this black sticker, and it's basically on most of the concrete poles, which are round. And this black sticker is incredibly good for getting points. And so you wouldn't guess ever Borneo, Malaysia on Borneo for this one, because it's always on the mainland. And this one is just to demonstrate that oftentimes, or a lot of the time, Malaysian poles are round at the top. And so if you see a round at the top pole, well, don't guess Malaysia necessarily, but it's good to know that Malaysia normally does use those. Okay, and here we are again on Sarawak. And one thing I noticed about the whole of Borneo, Malaysia, is that the concrete poles tend to be a little thinner. The same way that Montenegro poles tend to be a little thinner, so do these ones. I've never, about the Montenegro or this tip, I've never heard anyone say it. Perhaps people know it, probably people do, and I'm not even sure how accurate it is, because it was taking a long time to go through all these polls, so I wasn't super thorough, but definitely to take a look at that, take it into consideration. I'll be trying to verify that one, but that's something I noticed. Okay, here we have some metal poles as well, decently common in Malaysia, and yeah, that's just an example on Borneo as well. Okay, so here we are in the Philippines now. Philippines tends to use, as most common, these standard concrete ones. The good old, we're getting used to these ones now, aren't we? They're very common throughout Eurasia, and this one is also this location is good to highlight the fact that often Filipino poles kind of like have like the kind of like bit at the top off to the side instead of centered. You can see that it's basically on all these poles so far here, and that is quite Filipino, I would say. I wouldn't say it's definitely a way you should always distinguish it, but it's a good little tip towards Philippines, I would say. And so here's another Filipino pole, which is wooden. And here's one that's metal, so you can see all three. And metal poles are decently common in Philippines, I would say, and they're generally speaking a bit thinner. And then here we have another one here. And why did I bring up this section? Why did I bring up this pole here? I think this pole just demonstrates again. Okay, this one's actually an octagonal pole, which you do see every now and again. Okay, that's right. And yeah, this octagonal pole, don't confuse it with Mexico. I mean, you're probably not going to confuse this round with Mexico anyway, but with a green number plate over here, for example, but keep that in mind. Okay, next one. We are in Taiwan, one of the most iconic poles. You probably knew this before you clicked on the video, but we have the stripes going all the way down to the bottom. They're horizontal, they're like diagonal, and they are orange and black as opposed to yellow and black. And here we are in Japan, which has more of like a yellowy orange, and they are vertical. And again, both of these countries use a strong majority concrete round poles, and yeah. That is what you have to say about that. But also in Japan, you can often have them without the label. It's kind of less common in Taiwan to have them without the label. But here we have a Japanese location, and there's plenty of locations in Japan where they will not have any of the warning sticker on there. As for Korea, it's similar to the Taiwanese one, but the stripes are thicker. They don't go all the way into the ground, and it's more of a yellow than an orange. So yeah, pretty distinguishable, all things considered. Also, about Korean poles, is they often have this spiky thing at the top, which I've never heard anyone mention, but actually is a really good tip for South Korea. I think it's something I knew subconsciously, but yeah, they'll often have this spike on the top of their poles, and so you can see that like quite commonly throughout some towns in Korea. It's very common, so keep that in mind. It's good for very quick guesses. Okay, and here we are in Cambodia, and Cambodia is a country that loves to use section poles. So this is not a holy pole; it doesn't go all the way through, but it's a section pole. And again, it's kind of this French style where the sections don't go. Well, they're very short sections, not like the Brazilian ones, is what I want to say. Okay, and here is like a Cambodian round pole, less common than the section one, but also the standard one is quite often seen in Cambodia. And here we are in Thailand then, and Thailand is has a classic pole. It has dots all the way up and down it, all the way to the top and the bottom. And these dots, they're the Thai pole dots, and it's a squared concrete pole, and they're very distinctive indeed. And so here we are in Laos, and Laos tends to use a very Thai-looking pole. In fact, I would just call it a Thai pole as well. Pretty much the same as a normal one, I would say. So yeah, definitely worth keeping in mind that is what you're going to see normally in Laos. Okay, moving on to the next one is Vietnam. Vietnam uses section poles that like have sections all the way up and down, and they're on all sides. You see the sections actually, so that's kind of unique. But there's no access to the street view outside of the game, so this is the best you're going to have to deal with on my guide. Here we have Bhutanese poles, and Bhutanese poles are generally speaking metal. You often see as well some bamboo poles as well, though. So here are some bamboo ones. So if you see a combination of metal and bamboo poles, as well as some red number plates, you're going to be in Bhutan. And yeah, it's quite common in Southeast Asia. I didn't actually put many inside the slides, but to see like very thin wooden or bamboo poles, you can see that elsewhere in Southeast Asia quite a decent amount of the time. But to see so many bamboo and metal poles, you should be in Bhutan. Okay, so here we are in some new Gen 4 Bangladesh, and Bangladesh tends to use these kind of concrete poles. I think they often have the holes all the way down to the ground, like this one, the kind of tiny dots, but yeah, just the standard looking pole there. And also in Bangladesh, they have this hollowed out concrete pole. I think I forgot to put it for Philippines, but Philippines also often uses this hollowed out concrete pole. Although the Filipino one kind of looks more like the Chilean pole that we saw earlier, whereas this one kind of looks more like a Brazilian pole. But yeah, it's actually fairly common in Dakar, for example. And here we are in Sri Lanka, I believe. Yeah, we're in Sri Lanka here. And Sri Lankan poles, the most standard one. Sri Lanka's like similar to Portugal, where I said, they have like kind of three type of poles that they always alternate between in Portugal. Well, Sri Lanka's nice because it's kind of similar. And the first one here is looking like a Thai pole, except the dots don't go all the way to the bottom. They stay up the top, generally speaking. And it's kind of like a paler concrete as well, in this example at least. And here we have another Sri Lankan one, again, the dots don't go all the way down to the ground, and we have like wide holes here. Kind of similar to a New Zealand pole, this one, where the holes are kind of near the bottom. But yeah, between this style and the last one we looked at, that's most Sri Lankan poles. And then also you'll see like a lot of A-frame kind of squared concrete poles as well. And so between those three styles, that's pretty much all the things you'll see in Sri Lanka. It's quite a nice country for that reason, I would say. Okay, moving on to West Asia. Kyrgyzstan's easy because it has like similar to the Russian style poles here, so that's one we can tick off pretty easily. Again, they're normally A-frame or often A-frame, and they often have white painted at the bottom. And then Turkey is a country which we haven't mentioned yet, and Turkey is a nice country because it uses a lot of metal poles, so it makes it quite distinctive. And a lot of the times these metal poles look like this, and this one might not be Turkey exclusive, but it's certainly Turkey majority. The majority of the time you see this pole, which is just like two-dimensional. It's not 3D. It's not a 3D metal mesh like many of them are, but it's two-dimensional, and it's kind of like an A. And that one is very often in Turkey. Here's more of like a metal mesh one. These ones you often see in towns as well. And yeah, they kind of go alongside these other ones that we just saw now. And yeah, these ones are fairly common too. And then also you see big metal mesh ones. So they use all shapes and sizes of metal poles in Turkey. And this is just another example. Also, wooden poles, fairly common. Also, concrete poles, fairly common. This pole top is kind of looking like an Argentinian one, but also you just get like the standard kind of one without any top as well in Turkey sometimes. And then also this one, which is just like a standard kind of European looking pole, but with this particular top. I don't really know how best to describe that, but off to the side with this particular pattern is Turkey exclusive. Thanks Trobota for this information. And yeah, if you see this one, guess Turkey. Okay, so next one, this one, we are in the UAE, and UAE actually it's not a country that uses particularly many poles, but when you do, it's often going to be wooden, especially kind of out near a town or something like that, you'll see a wooden pole, and it kind of is kind of in like the standard like American style, so good to keep in mind. And here we have what is kind of maybe more common or maybe kind of very visible in certain parts of the UAE where you just have massive amounts of these massive electricity kind of big mesh metal poles, which, you know, stretch. It's kind of dystopian looking, isn't it? It's like an army of them, you know, in both directions. So there you go. That is UAE. Now we're in Jordan, where they often use metal poles, which is kind of unique, just like kind of thin metal poles. Yeah, it's not something I really thought about because Jordan's normally quite distinctive, but if you see these ones, quite probable that you're in Jordan. And then Jordan also has quite a good amount of wooden / concrete poles, which are kind of hard to distinguish actually because I can't even tell what this is, to be honest. But yeah, I think it might actually be wooden, just based on because it's a bit bent. But they'll also have concrete ones as well. And then over in Israel and Palestine, the go is metal poles. They love metal poles over in Israel and Palestine. And so here's kind of like a standard kind of smaller mesh one. And we have like bigger ones as well, quite often in Israel and Palestine. And so definitely keep these ones in mind because this is probably what you'll see most often in an Israeli town, this one here. Okay, moving on to Africa, where we're on the home straight now. So Africa, in Tunisia, they love to use metal poles, and this one also has the kind of francophone, like lat pull-down bar at the top, and they often have these very kind of flimsy-looking poles in Tunisia, so that's a good way to distinguish them, I would say, from elsewhere, and so, yeah, that is kind of the Tunisian style, and also, they often have these kind of Chilean-looking poles as well in cities and stuff like that. So keep that in mind. I wouldn't say they're particularly common, but yeah, any kind of like concrete pole is also possible to get there. Here's another example of like a concrete pole that you might see. But generally speaking, metal poles are the go, and you'll see these most common just everywhere you look around. So that's Tunisia. Moving down to West Africa here, we're in Ghana here, and Ghana tends to use kind of just like a very standard-looking wooden pole with the three like points at the top. And yeah, that is Ghana, and it's nice because it looks quite different to Nigeria, generally speaking, I would say. And so here's another example of Ghana, just kind of a slightly different one. I think this actually might be a concrete pole, that's why I've included it, but yeah, fairly similar, all things considered. And finally, we have like quite often in Ghana, we have like put together, like two poles put together by some metal bits in the middle, and that's also quite common in Ghana. And I've noticed that a lot of these are also at a 90-degree angle, which I didn't really look into too much, but I'm just noticing that now, and I'm pretty sure that would actually be a decent clue for Ghana as well. Okay, now we're in Nigeria, and Nigeria is the country with very similar poles to Brazil. You can see this one's remarkably similar to a Brazilian pole. Now I think the sections kind of go a bit higher on Nigerian poles, but yeah, they're very similar, and so normally you'll be able to tell the difference between the two countries by everything that's going on around you. But yeah, Nigeria has very similar poles to Brazil. And moving on, here we just have like kind of a standard like round concrete pole, as I've said 1,000 times this video so far. And now we are on to Senegal, where in Senegal you have often these section poles which are sectioned all the way to the top, near the top, and in the French/Spanish way. And this is kind of the most common pole you'll see in Senegal. And then also you'll have the lat pull down bar, classic. You've come to love it. It's the French style pole, and so you often see that as well. And also sometimes you just see these like kind of random metal poles with kind of huge bulbs as well. And so, yeah, I'm not really sure how common these are, but you definitely see them every now and again. So good to keep in mind. And here we are in Uganda, and Uganda tends to use a majority wooden poles here. And I did notice that kind of like this like 3 style is quite common in Kampala and stuff like that. But yeah, just generally speaking, wooden poles are the go there. And here we are in Kampala again. This one's kind of a more standard looking pole top here, similar to what you'd see in Ghana, for example. And here we are in Kenya, and Kenya, similar deal, to be honest, to Uganda, very similar indeed. Here's another example of it. This one's actually a concrete pole, so sometimes concrete poles as well, but generally speaking, wooden. And here we are in South Africa, or Southern Africa now. We're in Botswana. Botswana tends to use kind of like a darker wood for their poles, is what I've noticed, like kind of this darker brown. But yeah, just like a standard looking pole top there as well. And here's another one. Now we're in South Africa. South Africa, using wooden poles, generally speaking. All different pole tops in South Africa. I believe Lenley made like a guide, so I can ask him if I can link that in the comments or in the description or something like that. But if you want to get in depth in South Africa, it is possible, and there's lots of different pole tops over there. But for example, here we have one, like, you know, in South Africa, sometimes you have the T-bar at the top, sometimes you won't have the T-bar at the top like this. Here are some more. This one's like a very South African looking pole. I would say like this particular style here is quite distinctive to Southern Africa. Very occasionally in Australia you'll see similar poles, but yeah, I like that for South Africa for sure. Also, often you'll see double poles like this. Double wooden ones particularly common, and also this A-frame pole, this acute angle pole, kind of makes a letter A at the top. These ones you can see in, let me see if I can remember off the top of my head. South Africa, fairly common. Australia, fairly common. You can see them in Argentina as well. I'm just trying to think. They're the 3 countries where these kind of acute angle poles come up the most, so keep that in mind for sure. And here we are in Western Cape Province near Cape Town. You can see this kind of A metal bit at the top, and that's a region exclusive pole as well, so good to chuck that one in. Okay, and now we are in Eswatini, and one thing I noticed about Eswatini is that they rarely have the T-bar at the top of their bars, or the top of their poles. So, and they're also kind of using a darker wood, and they often have these nibs going off to either side, and so the T-bars, fairly uncommon over there. Good to keep in mind, although here we are with a T-bar, but even still, it's kind of like lower set on the pole. And so, yeah, even in the distance, you can see they're not too common. So I've never heard anyone say that, but could actually help you in your rounds, that's for sure. Some things I was thinking with my noggin here while I was going through this. And so here we go, a kind of standard-looking pole here for Lesotho, kind of similar to the rest of South Africa. Yeah, they are a country that uses the T-bars more often than Eswatini, at least. And so here's kind of a standalone wooden pole. But if you look around here, you can see more T-bars. And so, yeah, definitely a good way to distinguish that if you can't distinguish the country in other ways. Okay, and finally here, we are in Madagascar. And Madagascar, we've got the Francophone, or the French style top bit here. And then we also have sections all the way down to the bottom from here. And that is very French indeed, so good way to remember Madagascar, although you probably won't encounter too many poles over there because it has such limited coverage. Okay, we are on to the last continent now, Oceania it is, and this is the part where I'm an expert, so stay tuned. And so we have a wooden pole here, generic style, And this is what you'll see all over the eastern states of Australia, all over Australia indeed. So this is kind of what you'll see most of the time in Australia. And here's another example. This is the same kind of generic style, but with a concrete pole, which you do see fairly commonly in Australia. Although wooden is the go-to for Australia, I would say at least 10% of the poles in Australia are concrete, if you don't include the states that have kind of unique poles. Okay, and now we are speaking of those unique poles, we are in my home city, or my current city of Adelaide, and we do have a concrete pole with these two, I believe they are actually train tracks on either side, recycled train tracks, so metal, with the concrete in between. And these ones are basically exclusive to South Australia, but in South Australia they'll be used all over South Australia. So there's basically not many wooden poles at all in SA. We basically just use these Stobie poles, as they're called. And you can see these in Tasmania in big cities as well. The biggest cities in Tasmania do have Stobie poles, maybe 1 in every 10 poles over there. But for Adelaide, basically every pole. Let's see how many you can see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, basically in Adelaide, you know you're going to be there. All right. And here we are in Northern Territory, which uses a similar style to the Stobie poles, except it has no concrete in the middle, and it's a wholly pole made of metal. And both Stobie poles and these Northern Territory poles, so this is only Northern Territory, they tend to use rusted metal, or at least they tend to be rusted. So you're probably not going to see any that aren't rusted down the street here, as I expected. And so one thing to keep in mind with this holy pole is that you can see this over the border in Western Australia, Kununurra, for example, Wyndham, and even some towns further down here do not use normal Western Australian poles, but use the holy. I've been talking for a long time now. The holy metal walls. Okay, here we are onto Western Australia, where you can often see the kind of poles that are painted green at the bottom. Thick poles are probably more common, and these thinner ones, also quite common as well. And yeah, green painted at the bottom. Only Western Australia, very occasionally New South Wales in Sydney, I would say, but yeah, you can basically say in Western Australia when you see those most times. And so here we are in Tasmania, and Tasmania is notable because you have these olive green possum guards. So possum guards you can see all over Oceania, but olive green ones for Australia only in Tasmania. Actually, you can see them in New Zealand as well, but only Tasmania for Australia. And so this is an extremely efficient clue for getting Tasmania. In fact, most poles in Tasmania will have this olive green possum guard, so learn it right now. Tasmania is. You can instantly get a lot of points that way. This is a very Hobart-looking landscape, but let's move on to the next pole, which is the Queensland pole. And this Queensland pole is similar to the Malaysian pole that we saw earlier, where it's got this black smudge on it with numbers. And this pole, with that black smudge, with the kind of diagonal or white lettering, is between Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast. Okay, between that area, you can get this pole, and it's very common in there, very common indeed. And so if you see that, Brisbane or one of these coasts is the play, and you're going to get a lot of points for it. It's very nice. Okay, this is a Victorian exclusive pole top. Only in Victoria will you see this one. It's often on concrete poles or wooden poles, and it will have these 3 or 2. Sometimes this bulb is missing, but you have these 3 kind of big bulbs, and yeah, Victorian exclusive. And then we are moving on to New Zealand here, where they kind of have like the Chilean hollowed out concrete pole here. Often has like a metallic possum guard. And yeah, so concrete poles more common in the North Island, wooden poles more common in the South Island for New Zealand. That's a big meta, a good one, quite effective. And here is a second style, just a wooden pole with the concrete with the metallic possum guard. And then also you get these holy poles as well, made of concrete, and similar to the Sri Lankan ones, except the holes go a bit further up. And these are kind of uncommon, but you definitely do see them every now and again. Okay, so that pretty much concludes everything. I mean, Luxembourg and Greenland are kind of left off because I don't really understand them too well yet. Yeah, that video took a lot of research and time, so definitely give it a like. Also, no doubt I got a lot of stuff wrong in here, or at least a bit, so please do go ahead and leave a comment of the thing I got wrong. And, especially if you come from like an Eastern European country where I've, had to do a lot of searching and I couldn't dedicate as much time as I would have liked to some of those countries. So if you do think you know better or something, definitely do leave a comment. That'll be nice and most appreciated. I think there's more room to be done with Canada and South Africa, for example, than what I covered here. Not to mention the fact that Indonesia will have some more metas coming out soon once Kodiak publishes his thing. But guys, yeah, I thank you very much for making it all the way to the end of this one. This one was a bit of a grind, but I think if you watch this all the way into the end and you were taking notes, then you will improve a lot, especially if you go onto this document, which I'll have in the description, and check it out and try and remember these things, then you're going to go a long way. Also, if you want me to make like a simplified version of this, obviously you made it to the end, but if you think I should make a simplified version of this with just like all the like kind of unique polls, then I'd be more than happy to do that, kind of sort through and come up with my top tips, because this one was a little bit bloated perhaps, but yeah, I think you guys will have enjoyed it, and let me know if you want more tutorials as well. Guys, thank you very much for watching the video all the way to the end, and I'll see you guys in a video very soon. Like and subscribe, and goodbye.